Good morning, friends and neighbors. Another glorious WZLW New York day of possibility.
A sleep deprivation marathon would be great.
Let's make it a charity fundraiser, huh? We'll find a disease or something.
What's the record on this thing?
11 days awake.
11 days? Seriously? Live from Times Square, the great WZLW Wake-a-thon has begun. I am going to stay awake as long as it takes to convince you to make a donation. Let's do this for all the innocent children.
You'll be asleep before the first day of this circus is over.
Hello and welcome to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Pejkovic, and this is episode number 244. Out now on video on demand is Rapid Eye Movement, a thriller that follows a cocky radio DJ whose attempt to break the world record for staying awake is further complicated when an unknown yet dangerous caller threatens to kill him. Led by an impressive Francois Arnaud, Rapid Eye Movement is an engrossing thriller that joins the likes of Phone Booth and Talk Radio as a paranoid thriller told from the perspective of a man trapped in the comfy confines of a glass booth. Joining me now to talk about Rapid Eye Movement is the film's director and co-writer, Peter Bishai. Peter, I thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to speak with you.
So, I read another interview you did where you talked about the inspiration for this was a radio DJ back in 1959. His name Peter Tripp pretty much did the same thing that your DJ does in your movie. He stayed awake. This guy actually stayed awake for 201 hours, which is around 8.5 days. And he did it in a booth in Times Square. What was it about that story that you saw for a real good kind of, starting point for a movie that I can work with?
Yeah, I mean, when I read that in a behavioral psychology textbook when I was in college, well, way back, and it really just kind of hit me as being something that is extremely relatable, which is sleep deprivation. I mean, pretty much all of us have gone through sleep deprivation of some kind, whether we're behind the wheel, nodding off and, just inches away from disaster, or cramming to stay up late to do exams or whatever, or children, raising children, parents. It's something we all relate to. But then in the context of this guy going all the way to the limit, what he thought was the limit at the time, was very intriguing. But I think also the fact that it was in Times Square, it was the combination. So something that was incredibly intimate. It's one guy in a confined space within a much larger space. And I think the combination of the intimate and this epic kind of visual thing felt very, very appealing to me in terms of what could be done as a thriller. In some way, and I love confined thrillers, and I love just the idea that the conflict that he's facing is extremely personal. It's something that he's taking on this challenge. The fact that it was real, that someone did this, and there was this amazing amount of data and research as to what he went through it was just sort of a great place to start.
Now, the DJ in your movie, Rick, he has to beat 11 days.
64, 1964, yeah. It was a few years after.
High school students named
years after Peter. So Peter Tripp did his 1959 sleep deprivation marathon in Times Square. This kind of led to a bunch of copycat, media stunts that people did. But then this 17-year-old kid in California said, "I'm going to do this," and it turned out that there was a kind of the leading, if not the only really sleep researcher in the medical field was a guy by the name of Dr. Believe it or not, his name is Dement, right? Dr. Dement, who had actually been with Peter Tripp in that booth in 1959. And then he heard about this kid somehow, or maybe he got word to him that he was going to try to break the record himself. And so Dr. Dement also went to be with this kid and followed him for that amount of time. So it's well recorded, and really to this day that record stands.
And the reason why it does stand is because the Guinness World Records actually said after that, we're not doing any more of this because of the dangers that came with it. So Randy was experienced. Supposedly he couldn't identify objects. Even when he picked them up, he couldn't tell what they were. Hallucinations, paranoia, all of these things. Yep. And a lot of these things are used in your movie. Rick goes through these things themselves. And I just really are curious as to you have the data, you know the side effects, you know what can happen to people when they go through that. What did you want to pick and choose in regards to that you wanted to present on screen? Because you do some really nifty kind of stuff. Like, for example, there's a scene where he talks to like this little cricket, and it just tells him this really kind of like evil stuff, do this, do that. We'll have, all that kind of, how do you come up with stuff like that? Is there actually a circumstance where people went through stuff like that, actually saw creatures like this and were talking to them? I mean, where did you come up with your own kind of ideas of what side effects Rick will go through?
Yeah, I would sort of, casually just pull people that I would know, who I mentioned I'd been working on this script or something like this about sleep deprivation, and almost everybody I would talk to would say, I stayed up for 2 days one time and I started hallucinating and da-da-da. And everyone has their own kind of specific things as to whatever that might be. A kind of common one, and I think even I have gone through this, insects is something that is a very common thing. You kind of feel like you see bugs crawling around your eyeballs or something, or it's something very common that I noticed. Now, thinking about what to put in for those hallucinations, I wanted a variety of things. I knew that one of them was going to serve as a kind of inner voice for Rick, the character, and that it's a praying mantis that's speaking to him, and he's like it's really him talking to himself, right? But he's and it's his doubts and his fears are kind of attacking him as all of his defenses are beginning to crumble. In the script originally, it was a locust, believe it or not, and the reason I just went for that, I knew I wanted to be something in the insect world that could be animated. And I went with the locust because that has a kind of plague. We associate locusts with plagues, and part of the film is his journey is a kind of is an emotional journey. It's a physical journey. It's a mental journey, all of which breaks down. But there's also a kind of a spiritual journey that he's on, where his soul is kind of under attack, and he feels very much like he's being plagued. And so there's this sort of in mythological terms we associate. When it came time to do the animation, it was like, well, my VFX supervisor was like, you'll be better than a locust is a mantis, because a locust doesn't really have many long appendages, and I think whereas a mantis is, can dangle his arms and legs, and it just looks very interesting to go with, kind of thing. So that's how that came about. But it was something that had to be humorous. I knew from the beginning that it was always my intention that the journey would be intense and manic and crazy, but it had to be mixed with the humor, because the behavior starts to become erratic and crazy, and I wanted it to be funny, and that's I tried to take a page from Hitchcock, who always blended humor with suspense, and that was my intention. So yeah.
Playing Rick in the film is Francois Arnaud, and apologies to anyone in Quebec if I got the pronunciation wrong there. Mostly known for The Borgias and Blind Spot, other great TV work as well. He's in pretty much every scene in this movie. How did you know that he was going to be your guy to play this character?
Yeah, I wanted somebody who had to have the full range, and the full range going from utterly charming and a bit of a hustler, that you could, you knew he had a dark edge to him, but you still were kind of fascinated by him. Very, that New York kind of thing, and then would start to go into desperation and then paranoia and then the full kind of breakdown, and to pull off that range is really amazing. And so you have to start with someone who is extremely engaging and a kind of like almost like a classic leading man kind of thing, and then he goes into the opposite, which is this total destruction. So yeah, that he was perfect. I mean, he was absolutely perfect. Now, when we first met to discuss the role, he was like, he knew from the beginning that what a daunting thing this was going to do, because we were going to shoot it in Times Square for real.
Yep.
And to do that, to take on that, we actually, I spoke to some other actors, and they were kind of like, that was scary for them, to actually be that kind of exposed emotionally and physically in the middle of thousands of people. was a big challenge. And so he knew it was daunting and it was kind of scary, but he loved the challenge of it. And so I needed an actor that was going to embrace that whole thing, and he did.
You mentioned just now you filmed in Times Square. Your movie's something of a rarity. It's a New York set movie. It's actually filmed in New York. I tend to find a lot of movies that I watch sometimes it's like they film in Toronto to like double for New York for various different reasons. The Times Square aspect of it, how difficult is it to try to get permission to do that? Because it's such a high congestion, high traffic area, tourism and such. Was it hard for that to do, or was it as easier than people might think it is?
It was both. Okay, so first of all, New York City is an extremely filmmaker-friendly city. A lot of people don't even realize that. They hear New York and they think, oh, it must be crazy to shoot there. Generally speaking, the city makes it very, very easy to get permits and things like that to shoot. However, Times Square is the one exception. All right, in terms of doing what we did, which was if we were going to shoot just with a camera and run around Times Square, that would not have been a problem. But we had to build a set, and no one has ever done that before. To actually build a whole set, put it in Times Square, and do that, that was a no-go. So we came up with a technical plan, which was to take the entire set, mount it on the back of a flatbed truck, build all of the lighting and all the technical, the sound miking and lighting and everything that was actually built into the actual set itself in a practical way. And then we would shoot handheld on the truck. And so everything was literally self-contained on this truck. So we could drive it in and out of Times Square on the road as opposed to the pedestrian areas, which is most of Times Square is a pedestrian kind of malls where people congregate. And which we initially thought we could just put our booth on there, but that was not possible. Once we came up with this idea of putting it on this truck and driving it in, we met with the powers that be, and they were literally like, well, that's not, and they said, well, but think about it. We're literally just parking it. We're just, and they slowly, came to that, realized, actually, that's really cool. And believe it or not, they were as excited about it as we were, it seemed. And they gave us all the permits, and we had to work out scheduling in a way that was good for them and good for us. We couldn't shoot consecutively, so we had to shoot like 2 days at a time, 3 days at a time over a several week period. And we just mapped it all out, and it worked. Once we began to shoot, it was absolutely a blast because it was a very, very tight schedule, so we had to work very quickly, be extremely organized, but which you always want to do anyways when you're making a film. But the energy of Times Square was phenomenal, and you just can't fake that. You can go into a studio and you can use green screen and you can try to fake all that kind of stuff, and but I really, one of my mandates from the beginning was I wanted to make the ultimate New York film. I wanted this to be really New York, really Times Square, real energy, real people. So here was this small indie film, but we had thousands of extras every day. Usually in a movie, when you're shooting in the streets, you kind of want to keep people away, right? We had the opposite need, which is we want to bring people in. We want people to come into our shots. Because that's actually what's happening in the story for real. And so we had people always in the background of the windows of the booth. And then there were parts of the movie where the characters would actually interact with people in Times Square, and in those cases we had our production assistants would rope in people to actually participate in the shooting, and we were turning people away. Everybody wanted to be part of this, so it was a really incredible atmosphere where it was as if it was happening for real, kind of thing. And so it was, authenticity was my number one goal in this movie.
And I think the energy that you spoke of before, it's something that you definitely do feel. I don't think you can fabricate something like that. And energy is something that really... This is a film that has its ebbs and flows depending on where the main character's head is at. Sometimes he'll be in a downer, sometimes he'll want to go out there and start dancing in the middle of Times Square, and you can really feel that when watching that as well. I'm curious though, the booth itself, is it as comfy as it looks? Is it as small as it looks? And if so, how do you shoot in there? Are you in there by yourself with the camera, or is it much more roomier than it's made out to be in the movie?
Yeah, that's a great question. Now, the booth is actually a lot smaller than it looks on screen, believe it or not. The whole booth is about 7 feet square. Wow. It's actually in a diamond shape. And the way to make that work was the majority of the film was shot with an 18 millimeter lens, which is a very, very wide angle lens. And that doubles or triples the visual space on screen. So whatever you're seeing on screen, you have to imagine it being 2 or 3 times smaller than what you're actually seeing. So that we had beautiful lenses that for this film. We use these vintage Zeiss lenses, and it was the same lenses that Stanley Kubrick shot his films with quite a bit. And so that was a really cool kind of callback. And they're very, very organic, but this wide angle 18 millimeter is very, you get the wide angle view without really very much distortion. A lot of wide angle lenses will distort quite a bit and make the actors look terrible. This didn't have that problem. And but then once you're inside the booth, at any given time, there was always going to be Francois, often 1 or 2 other actors, and then the camera operator, the DP, who would be operating the camera handheld. All the sound was mic'd inside the booth, and then the sound recordist was outside the booth monitoring. And then that left me, and I really wanted to be in there. Initially, I thought I would be just outside the booth on a monitor, and then I would run in and out between takes. And on the very first shot, we did that, and I immediately knew that was not going to work because we were under so much time pressure. Just literally running in and out of a door can add a third to your time, and also you kind of lose the spontaneity of what's happening. So I had to be in there as well. So it's me, the camera operator, and at least 1 actor, if not 2 or 3. And so in some cases, there's like 4 or 5 people in there at one time. And that was my biggest challenge in the movie, as from a directing perspective, which is how to stage it. And I like to refer to it as a human Tetris game, where we're slotting people. Like I would move left, you say you move right. When you go here, you go here. So every time we're constantly choreographing our movement within the booth. And as soon as I'd say cut, the doors would fly open, and then everyone would go out and get some air, and then the makeup people would come in and adjust things. And after about the first half day, I think we got it down to a pretty good, well-oiled machine, And it was very important for me because we're in this confined space. I really wanted every scene to look different, to feel different. I didn't want to just do the same. It's just some people would just stick GoPro cameras in the corners and to shoot the whole film like that. I said no, this has to be shot like a really proper film, and that meant a lot of different camera setups. And I wanted a variety of setups. So the way the camera moves in one scene will be different in another scene. Where the camera is stationed, and I wanted the actors and the camera to move around each other constantly, and that was for me the most satisfying part of making this film, because I loved, as much as I loved the storytelling and the emotional journey, the technical kind of dexterity that we needed as a team to work on this film was fantastic, and I really, really enjoyed that.
It almost sounds like you were participating in a dance of some sort.
Totally. It was choreography. Every scene had to be choreographed, and it was a dance between me, the camera, and the actors in constant movement. And it was a lot of fun. And I think that can only work if you trust each other, and you accept the limitations of what you're doing, and you not just accept but you embrace it as a challenge. And we were dancing with each other for 2 weeks there. That's exactly what it was. Yeah, for sure.
Another element to this film is that it's very much a murder mystery film. Your villain, though, hardly appears on screen. It's the voice.
Yeah.
It's the voice is his calling card. When you're casting someone for a role like that, do you even meet? Do you just do stuff over the phone? I mean, because the voice is the number one thing, and the main thing that we as the audience are going to identify the killer as. You as a director, does the voice come first before anything else?
Yes, the voice for sure. That was always going to be the number one thing. So I cast David Rhodes, who's a fantastic New York actor, and I'd worked with him before on my first film, which was a comedy called The Dueling Accountant. This is when I first worked with him, so I'm well aware of his work and his thing. And he initially wasn't going to play the role. There were other actors that were in contention, and we auditioned a number of people. And then I said, "Hey, do you want to come in and read for it?" So he came in, and he just blew everybody away. It's like, it was incredible. So, and I think what he's largely, like, you're right, it's a disembodied thing. But when he does show up, it's really powerful. I think because you don't see him so when you finally do. And it leads to this, without giving much away. I mean, it leads to a big confrontation between protagonist and antagonist, and he brings and this was his. It was kind of in the script, but he brought a whole other layer to it, which was that he was going to be a very vulnerable kind of villain. That is a character who his motivation is pain and loss, and he does this crazy thing because of his own guilt and things like this, and he's just a master at communicating that kind of pain as a villain.
And he's a villain that has a very specific agenda as well. In that, the whole point of this stunt being pulled in the first place is that it's for charity, or they use it as charity. Really, it's just the DJ has an ego and needs ratings and such, but they're doing a charity in specific to spinal muscular atrophy, which the villain has a very kind of personal kind of link with. That is very interesting, because usually when you watch movies, it's very much kind of like a plain vanilla kind of thing. It could be, well, it's funny. There's a scene near the start of your film where they're talking about what can we do a charity on, and everyone goes through the different things. It could be this, could be that, and they give the reasons as to why not. And then it lands on spinal muscular atrophy. What was it about that specifically that was something that you guys, because it seemed to me that's a very direct thing, that you were trying to communicate something with the audience as well as it being part of the plot as well.
Yeah, so in the film near the beginning that you mentioned, Rick, the radio DJ, wants to do the sleep deprivation marathon, and it's going to be a charity fundraiser. The longer he stays awake, the more money people would send in to raise money. He's only interested at the beginning in just raising his ratings, and he's completely self-interested. Yeah. But he says, let's pick a disease to raise money for that will get a lot of attention and pull people's heartstrings and this kind of thing. So he completely selects it out of his self-interest, and his journey is that as this crisis escalates, he actually starts to empathize with people with spinal muscular atrophy, and actually that's part of his becoming a full human being, which is that he moves away from self-interest into more of a caring for others kind of thing. So knowing that was always the goal, I definitely wanted to approach it as something to do with children. Just from a writing perspective, I wanted it to be a child, because in a way it mirrors Rick's journey in that he himself has to kind of regress into a kind of childlike state as he starts to get broken down as a human being. He, all of the external trappings of his image starts to break down, and he just becomes this very innocent thing. And so I wanted that to mirror, and then it just started with research. I can easily say that I began with my co-writer Brendan Smith. We were talking about this. We actually had almost the exact same conversation that the characters in the movie have. It's like, which disease should we pick? What will be best? What can we sell best? Kind of thing. Mm-hmm. We actually started with a very self-serving. What would dramatically work best, and what would get the audience going, and this kind of thing. And then we didn't want to pick something that was that's you see a lot of in film. So we wanted something that was a little bit maybe unknown to people, and just the research led us there to SMA, spinal muscular atrophy. Now, then I didn't know anything about spinal muscular atrophy. So then we started reading about it and realizing how it just works perfectly for the story. And then I became like, wait a second, this is the number one genetic killer of children. This is why don't people know more about this kind of thing, and so I kind of had a journey for myself that was similar to what Rick went through, which I started as a writer looking for the most dramatic thing, and then realized that this is something so important that, and then hopefully our film will shed even just a smidgen of light on this topic, because we came to really embrace how important this is.
There's a scene where Rick interviews a young boy who seems to be in the throes of suffering from SMA. Who was that young child?
Yes. So his name is Dylan Cuevas, and he is an actual SMA boy. So everything you're seeing in that scene is the real deal. And that, in a way, I mean, that was maybe the highlight of the whole experience. We're doing a film that speaks about SMA in some way, and then we've got an actual SMA boy in there, and it was phenomenal for him, phenomenal for us. I mean, Francois talks about that. When he was acting in that, I think that's the last day of the marathon. So he's been awake for 11 days at that point in the story. So he's really at the bottom. And his interaction with Dylan was very authentic. He loved it. Dylan loved being part of it. It gave him an opportunity to do something that most kids don't even get to do. So it was great, and he was extremely prepared, extremely courageous, and then you'll see the parents in that scene with him. Those are his real parents. And so as a family, they not only were extremely helpful to us in shooting it, but just in terms of giving us background and research. And in fact, David Rhodes, who plays the villain, who's actually related to SMA in some ways as the parent of an SMA kid in the story, he met with them and they gave him background information and part of the research. And so it was as a filmmaker, that's the kind of authenticity that was essential, and I'm very, very grateful for what happened there.
And for everyone out there who would like to help out in regards to SMA, there's a website you can go to, www.curesma.org. You can go to there, you can donate, you can check it out, and you can research it for yourself. And you can also check out Rapid Eye Movement right now, available on video on demand. And look, Peter, I thank you very much for joining me today to talk about the film and the making of it. I very much enjoyed the film. I love me a good paranoid thriller, and this is a really good one. The titles I mentioned before, such as Phone Booth and Talk Radio, definitely suits in that pantheon of that type of film right there. So, Peter Bishai, I thank you very much for joining me, and hopefully everyone out there, check out the film. Check out also the web address that I had mentioned before in regards to SMA. Peter, I thank you very much again for your time today.
Thank you. It's been great talking to you.